Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. We're continuing our conversation with Ron and Jordan from Briess Malt and Ingredient Company. In this episode, we've got Ron talking about the entire over 100 years of malt making at Briess. Enjoy.
This seems like a good opportunity then to get into the fact that this is a pretty old company. I mean, you guys have been around a while.
It is. Yeah, starting as early as 1876 in Eastern Europe, the Moravia region of the Czech Republic, where at the time they were growing a lot of barley. And so it was natural for an import-export business to develop there. And first generation Ignatius Briess built a malt house and started producing product and shipping it regionally and then eventually around the world. And third generation maltster Eric Briess then immigrated to the United States in the early 1950s. And then he settled in New York, and he's the one who formed a relationship with Chilton Malting Company. And so he started procuring malted barley from there and then shipping it around the world. He was a global malt broker trader. And then he started roasting product at the Chilton Malt House as early as 1953, going back to the early days of what Jordan was talking about a minute ago with that roasting operation at Manitowoc. So that was happening already in 1953. And then eventually Roger Briess, the fourth generation owner, took over in the early 1970s. And he eventually bought the Chilton Malt House in 1978. And in 1978, the other thing that happened that was super significant for craft brewing is that was the year that home brewing was legalized. That was President Jimmy Carter that legalized home brewing in 1978. And so for a lot of things that happen that are significant in society, there's sort of that one trigger point that's the launch pad for those things to happen. And that was it, was that legalization of home brewing. And then in the late 70s and into the early 80s, there were some guys who were home brewing, mostly in their basement or their garage or an old warehouse, something like that. And at the time, Briess was the only malting company supplying malt that brewers could use. Because think back to that era where around Wisconsin, for instance, you still had Blatz, Schlitz, Heileman's Old Style, Stroh's over in Michigan, Hams and Grain Belt up in Minnesota. Those brewers were all big enough to take full truckloads of malt into a silo. But if you were brewing in your basement or garage, you couldn't exactly take a full truckload. And Roger Briess understood that, and so he developed these 50-pound bags of malt and made malt accessible to home brewers that then started making their beer commercially available to retailers or in tap rooms.
So in other words, you sparked the craft beer revolution.
We did. Yeah, Roger Briess, personally leading the company, was one of the just 4 or 5 people who were there in the early days of the craft beer revolution.
Because we interact, just as a frame of reference, we interact with 50-pound bags.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, still today.
Yeah.
And, you know, thinking back and rewinding the clock, Roger Briess unexpectedly passed away in 2001, and we had a celebration to commemorate the 20-year passing of Roger. And we did some interviews with some of those legacy brewers that were around at the time. And I'll give an example from talking with David Grinnell at Boston Beer. And they've been pretty successful with that Sam Adams brand and a few other things. They
certainly have, right?
Yeah. So this is what David said, because he was there in the early days of Boston Beer. He said, in the early days, Briess was the only game in town. At Boston Beer, we were so immature as a company. Roger Briess was there holding our hands. You guys were the complete package.
That's a fantastic quote.
Yeah, it is. And it's hard to imagine that now with all the resources and suppliers and whole supply chains that are set up around craft brewing. But those were in the early days when nobody even really knew what craft beer was in this country. Or This is an example from Charlie Papazian, who was the president of the Brewers Association for quite a while.
On every guest we've had, when we've asked them my signature question, who's on the Mount Rushmore of brewing in the United States?
Yeah.
Charlie is always on that list.
Right.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. And so what he said about Roger Briess was, he said, craft brewing was like a dark cloud. You couldn't get people to understand, distribute, or sell it. Roger Briess and Ron Siebel of Siebel Institute were the first industry people who threw their support wholeheartedly behind what we were trying to do. They could see the ideas floating around the room were something they wanted to be part of. And I think, today as craft breweries get started, there's still so many great stories of craft breweries that start. Really, every brewer and every brewery has a great story. And there again, it's kind of ideas floating around the room that seem so compelling that people want to be part of that. And so Briess was in the early days. And with those brewers and many more, like Sierra Nevada or New Belgium or New Glarus, we still have relationships with all those customers and are just proud to continue to serve them.
I want to pivot to that in a second, but I want to point out something that I think Gary's thinking, which is that we do so much history on this podcast, but Ron came in and just did it way better than I'd done it.
Maybe we should get Ron to be a co-host.
Yeah. Okay, I just, Ron, you're in. Malted milk balls, buddy. Malted
Thank you.
milk
I could
balls.
bring those every week.
I did have a question. So the initial, when they came to the United States, were they like the American representatives of a European company? Or acting kind of on that behalf? Or did they start a new business
It really
here?
became an American-based trading company.
Do you still have any ties with Europe in terms of, I don't know, any legacy type?
At this point, we do not. No. It was such a long time ago. And Eric Briess came over to the United States in the early 1950s. And at that time, really in that 10 years after the end of World War II, there was so much disruption to industry and supply chains and business relationships that it was really kind of a fresh start for Eric and Briess Malting.
One of the things we've talked about in this show is that there's been a rise and fall of brewing in America over the last 100 years. You go back 100 years, you had community breweries, especially in places like Wisconsin. Appleton had a brewery. Oshkosh had a brewery, a couple breweries. Point, I think, is one of the legacy, holdovers from that period.
Right.
And then there was a period of consolidation where it just kind of went down to like Miller, Pabst, and a couple very big breweries. And then you saw this revival with craft breweries. How did Briess ride that wave? Were they giving malt? Were they providing malt to a lot of the big brewers? I know you mentioned the craft brewing revolution. Was that did that revitalize the company?
Yeah, that was really the spark for Briess to enter brewing in a big way. And Roger, as we talked about a minute ago, was part of that early nucleus of folks who started craft brewing, and he just 100% believed in it and embraced it and thought, like, this could really be a thing. And I think some of those folks back then just saw what quality beer could mean for this country and how different that would be from what was currently being brewed by the mainstream brewers.
The macro lagers.
Yeah, right. The macro lagers. Mm-hmm. And so Roger and Briess as a company really threw our weight fully into craft brewing. And from those early days in late 70s and early 1980s until the early 90s, Briess was the only malting company in the U.S. supplying craft brewers. That's how different the business model was of what the company was doing.
We're talking beer, but what percentage of your revenues or your sales, say at that point, or say before craft brewing, were coming from the brewing industry versus today? Because obviously there's non-beer related malt sales that you guys are doing. What percentage of your business is that?
Right. Back in those days, I don't know. I haven't seen any numbers.
Very high, I would assume, or?
I'm not sure. It's always been a blend of some brewing ingredients and food ingredients. And we still have a significant food division that sells ingredients for things like bakery products, granola bars, cereal, pretzels, things like that, along with malted milk powder that has a variety of applications. So
Best in the world.
Thanks. It's always been a blend of brewing.
So is
and
most
food.
of your business now beer?
It still
brewing?
is.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you still have, would you say Briess is still the, and again, we're not talking about the base malts, but that 20% of a grain bill, you're still providing that for most of the country's craft brewing?
Yes. We are in more than half of the craft breweries in the country, based on
Which is a
estimates that
huge
we've
number.
done. Yeah, it is a huge number. There are 9,500 craft breweries right now, a number that has flattened out during the last 1 or 2 years, and we are in more than half of those. And you guys have probably seen this too, that when you go around to breweries, you might be in Montana or Florida or North Carolina or Virginia, and you'll see Briess bags sitting there by the brewing operation and the tanks.
Well, and as we were talking about before we went on air, when we had Charlie Bamforth on, who's the Pope of Foam, and he's now head of quality control at Sierra Nevada. He mentioned you guys multiple times in the interview.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we've had a long-term relationship with him.
Not even just the malted milk balls, which is, again, another topic that he probably mentioned off air 20 times, because he was trying to get us to send him some malted milk balls, I think. But, yeah.
Where do your 50 products come from? Let's say you wanted to.
I was wondering that too.
Let's say you want to make Puerto Rico, your 51st one. How do you determine it? I mean, is it demand? Are people saying we want this? Or is it you monkeying around saying, oh, we could do something like this? Here, people try it out.
I would say it's mostly based on customer demand. And Jordan may want to chime in on this too, but we have been really closely connected to our customers for a long time and pride ourselves on listening to them in terms of what their needs are. So just using an example of that, for instance, a few years ago, hazy IPAs became super popular. And some of the ingredients that are really good for adding haze are non-barley, so things like oats or wheat. And one of the products we introduced 6 or 7 years ago is blonde roast oat malt. And that's been super successful as an ingredient that brewers use to add haze. Or, for instance, one of the malts that's one of the malting styles that's been popular in the U.S. for quite a while is some of the heritage barley varieties from Europe, thinking Maris Otter or Golden Promise. And some of those malts can be a little bit more difficult to get or complicated, or the supply chains have lengthened out, and that doesn't always work for brewers' timetables. And so there was demand for a domestically produced version that had those characteristics. We're working now with a heritage barley variety that we're malting in that same way to deliver the bready character along with some honey and floral notes that is just like an English ale malt.
So back to the hazy thing. Someone's making a hazy IPA. They come to you. Do they say, I want a malt made of oats or wheat? Or do they come to you and just say, hey, can you give us something that has haze? And you say, okay, we got a product for you. And is there an R&D branch of Briess that you guys are working on new stuff all the time?
Yeah, this is the R&D branch right here. But I would say it's sort of a conversation between the customer and
we have a need for something
Briess.
hazy. What can you do? And then you just figure it out.
Yes, it's often a blend of that, right? So we're always keeping an eye on what's happening in the industry, as anyone who provides products to the industry would, right? So we're looking at what's currently happening, and we try to see how we can provide or what our products can provide to meet those needs. And we've got a one-barrel pilot brewery that we're lucky enough to produce beer in pretty regularly. We've got a great team in Chilton, Dan Bees and Scott Heimerl. Scott is a big hazy IPA fan. He's actually tweaked his recipe a number of times. He's looking for any reason to practice. And so, as things change in the industry, we're always evaluating our own products, how they can be used, and then also looking for alternatives that we can potentially use to either do better or provide something unique and interesting to a different style of beer.
So you mentioned supply chains. Where, I'm assuming these are coming in by train
Yes.
at some level.
By ship, isn't it also?
Some comes in by ship, but mostly by rail because of the relationships we have with growers in Wyoming and Montana.
So that was my question. So the bulk of this 2-row barley, which is kind of the base ingredient for your 50 products,
Yes.
minus the oats and stuff that you.
Yeah, a few oats, a little bit of wheat.
So that's coming from Wyoming, Montana.
Yes, Bighorn Basin, it's known as, and it is one of the premier growing regions in the world. It has warm days and cool nights, and it's dry in general, so there's less disease because of moisture issues. And particularly in Wyoming, a lot of our growers use floodwater irrigation, so they can bring it in these channels and get water to the base of the barley plants in the exact amounts and the exact time that they want it to. So it's really a perfect growing region. And we've got those relationships with 300 established barley growers. A lot of them are third or fourth generation that they've been out there, which is super cool. And bringing up their kids for a love of barley and farming in that region. And then as part of that, we also have an elevator operation out there with several million bushels of storage. And then that rail line connects our Wyoming operation with the Manitowoc malt plant. So we're bringing in cars year
I
round.
love logistics. So you're literally storing a ton of barley out west.
Yes.
And then just bringing it to you kind of on an as-needed basis throughout the year.
Yes.
That's cool.
And you, because you are so comfortable with the growing conditions, with the climate, with the agricultural practices, this is probably why the product that you're consistently turning out is in half of craft breweries in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean,
the
because you guys
difference-
are like the gold standard, and there's clearly a reason for that you're controlling it at every interval.
Right. Yeah, we have full control of the supply chain all the way through to packaging. And, you know, it's sort of obvious that when you're making a food or beverage like beer, that the raw materials that you use really make a difference. And having seen some other malted products, our malt is cleaner and more consistent and higher quality. And we get feedback from customers all the time that they do notice that when they've brewed with multiples or they do sensory evaluations and they get cleaner, better, more consistent results with Briess Malt.
Earlier you said you could make about 1 million pounds of malt a day.
I'm still overwhelmed.
Help
by
me
that.
visualize that. Like, how many train cars is that?
Depends what rail line you're talking about.
We need a whiteboard.
We do. I'm going to start drawing a picture. I'm getting itchy. But so that's the capacity of the plant when it was at its peak. We don't operate the entire campus. So there's room for expansion yet. But in a typical day, we can make close to 750,000 pounds, I believe it is. I have to math it out, but roughly. Typical rail car that we receive is about 200,000 pounds.
So 3 to 4 a day,
Yeah.
rail cars?
Yep.
And are you mostly, is your market mostly craft beer, smaller breweries, or do you also work with some big boys as well?
We do work with some bigger breweries, but
Bigger Sierra Nevada type brewery,
that's our primary.
not like Miller Budweiser.
Yeah.
Do they do their own malting? I don't even know how they
Yeah,
would do that.
so the larger breweries do a majority of their own malting, right? So the facility that we purchased in Manitowoc formerly was owned by Anheuser-Busch, right? So they had closed it a number of years ago, and then we ended up purchasing it when we had the opportunity because it worked out a lot.
I'm
of
guessing
ways
they're just trying to
properly.
mass produce the same thing over and over and over. They're not.
Yeah, you can imagine a
Yeah.
facility that was designed to make 1.8 color base malt doesn't necessarily make 20 color Munich malt as easily. So, obviously the facility had to go through we had to change some things and make sure that we could produce all the diverse products we needed to make in the same in the same ways, which poses a lot of really interesting challenges. It was, was great to be a part of because we could go through, at the time when we purchased that facility, we also had a malt house in Waterloo. So at one time we were operating 3 malt houses, of which we need all the products that are being made at the facilities to match the same flavor profile, because analysis is one thing in terms of color that you can measure, but a lot of stuff doesn't show up on a COA, right? What is the flavor and the aroma, which is critical to your finished beer? How does that match? And you're using 3 different water sources, potentially a different style of drying in terms of a double deck or a single deck kiln. And we had to go through the challenge of making sure all our products could match at all 3 facilities. And that was part of that was expanding our sensory team, doing formal training with a larger team to make sure that we could ensure what we sent out the door from 3 facilities all matched the same profile.
If I want to, Ron, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, as a result of all that consolidation, one of the things you guys may know because you're local is that Manitowoc is the specialty malt capital of the world. This is the official proclamation. And it speaks to some of the things we've been talking about tonight, that going back to the early days of the craft brewing industry in the U.S., Briess was there and has grown along with it. Largest product line, highest quality, being in more than half the 9,500 craft breweries. We have a center of malting excellence in Manitowoc, of which Jordan is a member. And then we're also involved in the community.
Are there other malters in Manitowoc?
There are not.
Oh,
no.
I didn't.
But there used to be. It has the great history going back more than 100 years to that malt plant that we're in right now. And I brought along this beer case where it was known as Malt City long ago. That was before malting operations moved toward the west, kind of like the dairy industry, that now most barley is grown in the western U.S., whereas back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, a lot of barley was grown in Wisconsin to feed the large breweries here. But that has evolved over time, and now most of that's done in the West. But Manitowoc has been known as Malt City for about 100 years, and we're proud to carry on that tradition.
So we have a pretty loyal listener base who show up, from different parts of the country. We've had someone from San Francisco. We've had
we've had people take detours of several hours
just to come and
because they were podcast listeners,
right? Yeah. Because they wanted to meet Gary or Bobby or myself or whatnot. If some of the folks who are listeners, is there a visitor experience at either Manitowoc or Chilton that they could see how the sausage is made, if you will? Can they see anything if they were to come there?
Tours are one of the favorite things that I do, where you get to share what you do with, the world.
I think we should go.
We're totally going.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 100% we're going.
They don't, the facilities are not designed for tours. So we don't do public tours, but we do occasionally do smaller tours for brewers and customers.
For VIPs?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
We do a malt and brew workshop once a year where we bring in,
like lay people, just normal people?
Typically it's...
But people in the industry?
Yeah, people in the industry. I'm pretty sure Bobby was there one year.
He probably was.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't need to go again, so we're just going to go in his place.
He's been there.
No, we could bring a camera and do a video for the Patreon supporters. And
right.
Who, by the way, are getting a... Do you see the beer?
Yeah.
That Bobby made?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a special beer that was for the podcast that he brewed.
I look at it this way. I mean, if Bobby really wanted to go to the malting workshop and to get malted milk balls, he would have come.
He'd be here today.
Right.
He would. And, he's not here. And, because he's not here, what the hell is going on with the malted milk balls?
Well, we have had those for a long time.
Can I make a proclamation?
Mm-hmm.
They're one of the top 5 things a Wisconsinite can put in their mouth.
Yeah, I agree. They are. They're amazing compared to the normal level of quality of malted milk balls, such as Whoppers. And we have had malted milk powder made in our plant for a long time. And making malted milk powder that goes in the center of a malted milk ball isn't something that many companies do because you have to be able to process grain and dairy in the same building. And that's difficult to do. But we do that at our facility here in Wisconsin. And we provide that malted milk powder to a candy company, and they make those malted milk balls for us. And we don't want to be in the malted milk ball business.
If you don't want to make a ton of money, I get it.
Right, we don't. They're just goodwill. We share those with our brewing customers. The only place they're sort of officially available is Vern's Cheese in Chilton, right around the corner from our company office. They are available at
I have
Vern's.
been to Vern's Cheese. We're taking a road trip to Vern's Cheese.
How far is Vern's Cheese from here? Door to
30
door.
30 minutes.
32 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. As I mentioned to you off air, we had Charlie Bamforth on, and you couldn't get, like, he was talking about those, like he had just had them yesterday. And I think it had been some time since he had them. But that was a powerful thought for him. They are that good.
Yeah, they're that good and that different from what people are expecting with any type of candy. They're just something really special. And so we're glad to have those and glad to share them with our friends in the craft brewing and food communities.
And you brought some for the folks here, but not for Bobby and Allison.
We did actually. But if they don't listen to this podcast, you don't have to tell them.
See it. This gets edited out. Yeah, we're
Right. Like, we control the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
So you take that with your statement, and he agrees totally.
Right.
And if there were a craft beer festival that you didn't know about in this area, would you want to know about it?
I would.
Because we have one in Manitowoc. Just a stone's throw from the malt plant. Every year, we have a craft beer festival with about 30 of our customers from around Wisconsin. And we pour craft beers all afternoon. Every brewer brings 4 beers. So the quick math on that is there's 120 different beers to sample. And so that's a great starting point. And as you would expect, there's also some food trucks, some live music, a couple of charities on hand like Lakeshore Humane Society with a few puppies. And it's a great way to spend a Saturday afternoon. This year it's on Saturday, August 2nd from 2 o'clock till 5:30, downtown Manitowoc.
We need to, that's Mile of Music here. That's a tough day here for us because we'll have, I don't want to say the number because of the fire department might be listening, but there will be a lot of people in that space. But we need to be a part of that, I think, at some level.
Yeah, and any craft beer festival is a great thing for the industry. Just getting craft beer in front of more people and discovering how awesome it is. Some people think they're not beer people, but maybe they haven't had an imperial stout or a wheat beer or a sour or something like that that's different than what their experience with beer has been previously. Right. It's not just lagers and pilsners. And so it is a celebration of that.
Right. As awesome as beer festivals are, you guys are more awesome.
Well, thank you.
You personally and Briess in general. Thank you for being here. This was totally enlightening. And thanks for taking the history job at McFleshman's.
Glad to do it.
Right.
I love history.
Right.
All right, well, that will conclude this episode of Respecting the Beer. The producer of Respecting the Beer is David Kelso. Without David, there would be no show. Remember to subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast player so you never miss an episode, and join the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes and support the show over on Patreon, where you can listen to bits that don't make it on the air, as well as get opportunities for beers that are only available to Patreon supporters. Links to both of these are in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.